Good morning, everyone. And then today I'm giving a talk on the sixth Chinese ancestor of Chan Buddhism, whose name is Dajian Huineng. So often we say Huineng, but I watched a Chinese movie about Huineng, and they pronounce his name Huineng. So that's how I'm going to try to say it today. I think it's fair to try to pronounce someone's name as it was actually pronounced. So I'll do my best. So Huineng was the sixth ancestor of Chinese Chan sect. He was born in 638 current era in a small town in the southernmost part of China, not far from what is now Hong Kong. And he died in the same town in 713. The text that contains his teaching was first compiled sometime between 700 and 720 by his disciple Fahai, and it was titled the Platform Sutra. Because the sermon that forms its heart was delivered from a raised platform before an audience numbering in the thousands. So you've probably heard of the Platform Sutra. If you didn't know that was connected to Huineng, that's where it comes from, and the name comes from standing on this platform. Though I did read that there could be some other interpretations for what the platform was. Platform being a higher teaching, a raised teaching. And so we'll get into that too. Raised above what, possibly. And so there's some interesting controversy and competition within the schools of Chinese Buddhism at the time. So Red Pine, who's I didn't bring the book here. Red Pine is a modern translator and commentator on Buddhist sutras, especially Chinese. And so that's the book that I was using for this talk today, primarily. And he says that the Platform Sutra is the most studied, the most quoted, and the most influential of all the texts that teach the branch of Mahayana Buddhism known as Zen. So I asked Roshi about that this morning, and we kind of came to the conclusion that not everybody would agree with that. Some people might say the Heart Sutra is more influential, or maybe the Diamond Sutra, the Lankavatara Sutra, but there's different ones. But this seems to be the one that Red Pine believes to be most influential. And the Platform Sutra has three parts. The first part, which we'll hear more about today, is the story of Huineng's life and some of his teachings. And then the other two parts are supposedly add-ons that came shortly after he died, and then like almost right after he passed, and then 20 to 30 years, and then the third part 20 to 30 years after he passed away. The version that I'm referencing today is called the Tunhuang version of the Platform Sutra, which dates back to 780 current era, and which is about 65 years after Huineng passed away. And that's the earliest known written version of this Platform Sutra. There's another one that was right around the same time, and they both have slight differences in what they say, but mostly they're pretty similar. But this version, which wasn't found until much later, is considered to be the most pristine copy and is most legible and least damaged version. And some of the interesting controversy around the Platform Sutra is that these second parts were added likely to support the the successors of Huineng afterwards and what they were teaching. And there was some controversy around one of the teachers, Shenhui, uh, who's almost been erased from Zen history. Um, and apparently he had a huge influence on this third section of the Platform Sutra that basically, well, both the second and the third parts, basically the followers, disciples, and these successors of Huineng were basically wanting to substantiate their versions of Zen and their teachings of Zen and their lineage and their teacher by slipping this into the Platform Sutra. So there's some interesting history and controversy around this particular sutra and the ancestry here. So in the story that you'll hear today about the life of Huineng, there you'll hear a little bit of a reference to the south and the north. And so Huineng was from the south, and then he went to the north. Well, he eventually went to the north, but there you'll hear some language around, oh, you're from the south, which means you're a jungle rat or a barbarian. Um, and the northern apparently were the more sophisticated and intelligent and maybe more affluent uh, practitioners of Buddhism. So you'll hear a little bit of that. And the reason I bring that up is because this has a big impact on the history of Zen, and it even impacts us today, is because there was at the time, or as a result of Huineng's teachings, there became the southern school of Chan Buddhism, and then separated from the northern school of Chan Buddhism. The northern school was the gradual enlightenment school, which based its philosophy off the Lankavatara Sutra, which emphasizes Buddha nature. So these are called the Buddha nature teachings and these are similar to what we are familiar with in the Soto school of that we are all Buddhas, all beings are Buddhas. There's nothing that's not Buddha. So relax, stop trying so hard. And then there's the Southern school that is the sudden enlightenment school that emphasizes the importance of Kensho, of Satori, awakening, to experience one's true nature and emptiness. So these are the Shunyata, which means emptiness, teachings from the Diamond Sutra. And so these are two different schools that even show up in Tibetan Buddhism, and Indian Buddhism, the Madhyamaka, and the Yogacara schools of Buddhism. So these two different lines of philosophical approaches to Buddhist practice have been around since much longer than just Soto and Renzai schools in Japan. This has been going on for a long time. And we chanted this today. Actually, we chanted about the northern and southern school. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So you know this line in the Sandokai, the identity of relative and absolute, or it's also called the harmony of relative and absolute. Chant, and the line goes like this. The mind of the great sage of India is intimately conveyed from west to east. Among human beings are wise ones and fools, but in the way there is no northern or southern school. So it's wiping out this distinction of the northern and southern school, because in the way, this distinction does not exist. And so you can see that there was probably a lot of talk happening at that time. And the Sandokai was supposedly written by the eighth ancestor of Chan, Shitu Jiguan, or Sakito Kisen in Japanese. And that was around 60 years after Huineng passed away. So let's see. one last thing I'll say on this piece is that it seems like the southern school would be the Renzai school or the Linji school of Zen or Chan, and the northern school would be the Chaodong or school of Zen. But actually, they were different schools. The northern school and the southern school died out, and the Linji and the Chaodong schools began with different teachers. And even though there is a connect, there's clearly, it's not like people weren't talking to each other and going to each other's monasteries and learning from each other. So there's clearly connection, but they are different. They are actually different schools of Chan and Zen. So one last piece before I dive into the Platform Sutra and the life of Huineng is that all surviving lineages of Chan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism today connect to Huineng. So in the ancestral lineage. So we right now are practicing in the ancestral lineage of Huineng. So Roshi's transmission, his line of teacher to student, um, you know, technically or theoretically traces back to Huineng. So we are all Dharma, great 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 grand descendants of Huineng as Dharma practitioners. So today I'm just going to read the first part of the Platform Sutra. And the reason I'm choosing to read today, two reasons. One is I've heard the story of Huineng, I don't know, 100 times or more from Roshi, from other teachers in different books. And I've heard different versions of it. I've heard different stories of it. And it was really neat when I was getting ready for this talk to actually spend some time with the text, which I had done before a little bit, but I really, put some time into spending some time with this text and the history of it. And it was really wonderful to actually read the actual Platform Sutra and hear the story as it came through. So I watched the movie, I read the book, I reflected on my memory of other versions of the story that I heard, and they're all different. And so it was really neat to kind of say, okay, let's go with just what's right here in the Platform Sutra. So that's the version I want y'all to hear today. The second reason I'm deciding to read it today is because Kendo, one of our Dharma holders who lives up in Canada, when he gives talks, sometimes he just reads large sections of certain texts or sutras. And in the past, I kind of had this response of like, come on, I want to hear your interpretation. I want to hear the life that you're bringing into it. But then one time he read one, and I realized how wonderful it was to just sit and listen to this ancient text that he was reading. And I know Corin here has led some groups here at the Abbey in times past about uh, basically reading the sutras and just listening to the sutras. So I'm going to read the first part, or the first part of the first part of the Platform Sutra today. And so here's the name of the Platform Sutra. The Maha Prajna Paramita Sutra of the direct teaching of the Southern School of the Supreme Mahayana, the Platform Sutra. Delivered at Tafan Temple in Xiaochu by the sixth ancestor, Master Huineng, in one volume, compiled and recorded by Fa Hai, recipient of the formless precepts and advocate of the Dharma. Master Huineng took his seat in the lecture hall of Tafan Temple to expound the teaching of Maha Prajna Paramita and to transmit the formless precepts. Seated below him on the occasion were more than 10,000 monks, nuns, and lay people, along with Magistrate Wei Chu of Xiaochu, and more than 30 officials and 30 scholars. Together they asked the master to explain the teaching of Maha Prajnaparamita. The magistrate then instructed the master's disciple Fahai to make a record to pass down to future generations so that students of the way who carry on its guiding principle and who transmit it to others might have this testament as their authority. When he spoke this Platform Sutra, Master Huineng said, "Good friends, purify your minds by reciting the teaching of Mahaprajnaparamita." Then the master stopped speaking while he purified his own mind. After a long time, he spoke again. "Good friends, please listen. My kind-hearted father was originally from Fanyang. But he was dismissed from office and banished to Lingnan and lived in Shenxiu as a commoner. My father died when I was quite young, and my widowed and destitute mother moved to Nanhai, where I experienced hardship and poverty and sold firewood in the marketplace. Then one day a shopkeeper ordered a load of firewood brought to his store. After he took the delivery and paid me, I walked toward the door and met a customer reciting the Diamond Sutra out loud. As soon as I heard the words, my mind felt clear and awake, and I asked the man, 'Where did you get the scripture you were reciting?' He said, 'On Huangmei County's East Fengmao Mountain in Chichu Prefecture, when I was paying my respects to the fifth ancestor, Master Hongjin, also known as Daman Hongren. His congregation included more than 1,000 disciples, and while I was there, I heard him tell the monks and lay people that just by memorizing the Diamond Sutra, they would see their natures and immediately become Buddhas. As soon as I heard this, I felt drawn by something from a past life. I said goodbye to my mother and left for Huangmai's Fengmao Mountain to pay my respects to the fifth ancestor, Master Hongjin. Master Hongjin asked me, so in that section there, Huineng is in town. He hears someone reciting the Diamond Sutra. He has an awakening. He has a Kensho experience. He then asks the person, "Where did you learn this?" And the person tells him about the fifth ancestor, Daman Hongren. And Huineng goes there to the monastery there. Master Hongjin asked me, "Where are you from? And what exactly do you hope to get from me by coming to this mountain to pay your respects?" I answered, "Your disciple is from Lingnan, a commoner of Shenxiu. The reason I came all this way to pay my respects is I want to be a Buddha. I don't want anything else." The master scoffed. "But you're from Lingnan and a jungle rat as well. How can you possibly be a Buddha?" I replied, "People come from the north or south, not their Buddha nature. The lives of this jungle rat and the masters aren't the same, but how can our Buddha nature be different?" The master was about to say something more to me, but when he saw his attendant standing there, he didn't say anything else and sent me to join the Sangha workforce. A novice then led me to the milling room where I pedaled a millstone for more than 8 months. One day, the fifth ancestor suddenly called all of his disciples together. After they had assembled, he said, "I've told you that the greatest concern for a human being is life and death. But you disciples spend your days making offerings, just looking for ways to reap merit and not for a way out of the bitter sea of samsara. If you're blind to your own nature, how can you find the doorway to merit? Go back to your rooms and look into yourselves. Those of you who are wise, make use of the prajna wisdom of your own nature. Each of you write me a gatha. When I read your gathas, if any of you understands what is truly important, I will give you my robe and my dharma and appoint you the sixth ancestor. Hurry, as if there were a fire." Having received these instructions, his disciples headed back to their rooms and said to one another, "There's no need for us to clear our minds and trouble ourselves about writing a gatha to show the abbot. The venerable Shenxiu is our precept instructor. After he receives the dharma, we can look to him. Why should we write a gatha?" So they all stopped worrying about it, and no one dared to submit a poem. At that time, in front of the patriarch's hall, there was a 3-section long corridor. Because people left offerings at the foot of the wall, the abbot wanted to cover it with scenes from the Lankavatara Sutra and paintings of the 5 patriarchs transmitting the robe and the Dharma as a record to be passed down to future generations. The painter, Lu Chen, had inspected the wall and was going to begin work the following day. The Venerable Shenxiu thought, this is the precept instructor at the time, the sort of the head student, the most seasoned and accomplished student of Daman Hongren, the 5th ancestor. The Venerable Shenxiu thought, no one is going to submit a mind poem because I'm their precept instructor. But if I don't submit one, how can the ancestor tell me if my understanding is deep or not? It would be right for me to show the ancestor a poem that reveals my understanding, as long as what I wanted from the Dharma. But it would be wrong as long as what I wanted was the patriarchship. I would be no better than a fool who thinks he can usurp the position of a sage. But if I don't submit a poem, I'll never receive the Dharma. As he considered this, he kept thinking, what a predicament. Finally, at midnight, without letting anyone know, he went to write his poem on the middle of the south corridor wall in hopes of attaining the robe and the Dharma. When the patriarch sees my Gata and reads these words, he thought, if he comes to find me, the moment I see him, I will tell him I wrote it. But when he sees my Gata, if he says it's not good enough, it will be because I'm deluded and the obstruction of my past karma is too great, and I'm not ready to receive the Dharma. The master's mind is impossible to fathom. I may as well stop worrying about it. So the Venerable Shenxiu held up a lantern and wrote his Gata on the middle of the south corridor wall at midnight, and no one saw him. His Gata went like this. The body is the Bodhi tree, the mind is like a standing mirror. Always try to keep it clean. Don't let it gather dust. After Shenxiu wrote this Gata, he returned to his room unseen and lay down. At dawn, the 5th ancestor sent for the court artist Lu Chen to come to the south corridor to paint scenes from the Lankavatara. The 5th patriarch the 5th ancestor suddenly saw this Gata. After he read it, he told Lu, you've gone to so much trouble and come so far, we will pay you 30,000 cash, but we won't need any images now. The Diamond Sutra says, all images are illusions. It would be better if we kept this Gata for deluded people to recite. If they rely on it for their practice, they won't fall into the 3 unfortunate states of existence, and it will be a great help to anyone who cultivates the Dharma. The master then called his disciples together and burned incense before the Gata. When everyone saw this, they were filled with admiration. Unless you all recite and understand this Gata, he said, you won't see your nature. Anyone who relies on this for their practice won't regress. As his disciples recited it, they all did so with respect and exclaimed how wonderful it was. Later, the 5th ancestor called Shenxiu to his room and asked, do you write the Gata? Did you write the Gata? If you did, you're ready to receive my Dharma. Shenxiu said, I'm guilty, it's true. I was the one who wrote it. But I don't dare ask for your patriarchship, only for the master's consideration as to whether your disciple has acquired enough wisdom to understand what is truly important or not. The 5th ancestor said, this Gata of yours shows your understanding has only reached the threshold and has not yet entered inside. If ordinary people use your Gata in their practice, they won't regress. But someone with such an understanding who seeks perfect enlightenment will never realize it. If you want to enter the door, you have to see your nature. Go back and think about this for a few days and write me another Gata. If you're able to enter the door and see your nature, I will give you the robe and the Dharma. Shenxiu left, but after several days, he still hadn't written anything. A novice walked past the milling room chanting. So the milling room is where Huineng was sent to work for 8 months. Another novice monk walked past the milling room chanting this gatha. As soon as I heard it, so this is Huineng speaking now. As soon as I heard it, I knew it was by someone who hadn't seen his nature or understood what was truly important. I asked the boy, "What gatha were you reciting just now?" The novice said, "Don't you know? The abbot said nothing is more important than life and death, and he wants to pass on this robe and his dharma. So he told his disciples to write a gatha and show it to him, and he'll give his robe and dharma to whoever understands what is truly important, and that person will become the sixth ancestor." One of the senior monks, Shenxiu, wrote this formless gatha along the south corridor, and the patriarch told all of us disciples to recite it, and whoever understands this gatha will see their nature, and whoever uses it for their practice will achieve liberation. I replied, "I've been treading this mill more than 8 months, and I've never been to the front of the patriarch's hall. Could you please lead me to the south corridor so that I can see this gatha and pay my respects? Hopefully, by reciting it, I'll establish a karmic connection and be reborn in a Buddha land." The novice then led me to the south corridor, where I bowed before the gatha. Because I was illiterate, I asked someone to read it. Once I heard it, I understood what was truly important, and I also composed a gatha. I asked someone who could write to write it on the west corridor wall so that I could reveal my mind. Unless you know your own mind, studying the Dharma is useless. But once you know your mind and see your nature, you understand what is truly important. My gatha went like this. Bodhi doesn't have any trees. This mirror doesn't have a stand. Our Buddha nature is forever pure. Where do you get this dust? Then I composed another one. The mind is the Bodhi tree. The body is the mirror stand. The mirror itself is so clean, dust has no place to land. When the disciples in the courtyard saw these gathas of mine, they were all dumbfounded. After I left and went back to the milling room, the fifth ancestor suddenly came down the corridor and also saw them. He knew I understood what was truly important, but he didn't want others to know. So he told everyone, "This one doesn't get it either." At the beginning of the third watch, the fifth ancestor called me into his room and explained the Diamond Sutra to me. As soon as I heard the words, I understood. So he had an even deeper, in many of the stories, he had an even deeper Kensho or Satori experience at that moment. And that night, unknown to anyone, I received the Dharma, as he transmitted the robe and the direct teaching to me, and I became the sixth ancestor. The robe is an embodiment of trust that has been handed down from one generation to the next. But the Dharma is transmitted from mind to mind and must be realized by people themselves. Then the fifth ancestor said, "Huineng, since ancient times, the lives of those to whom this teaching has been transmitted have hung by a thread. If you stay here, someone will harm you. You must leave at once." After receiving the Dharma and the robe, I left during the third watch, and the fifth ancestor accompanied me personally to the 9 Rivers ferry. As I boarded, we said goodbye, and the ancestor instructed me, "Go now, and do your best to take the Dharma south. But don't spread this teaching for 3 years. Wait until the hard times are over before you go around teaching. And be skillful when you guide those who are deluded. Once they are able to open their minds, they are no different than those who are enlightened." Our farewells done, I headed south. Less than 2 months later, I reached Taiyu Ridge. Unknown to me, several hundred people had been chasing me, hoping to catch me and take away the ancestor's robe. But they had all given up halfway, all except one monk, whose surname was Chen, and whose Buddhist name was Huishun. He had previously been a general of the 3rd grade, and he was a rough character. He caught up with me at the ridge, and I offered him the ancestor's robe, but he wouldn't take it. He said, "I've come all this way for the Dharma. I don't want the robe." So I transmitted the Dharma to Huishun there at the ridge. He was ready to hear, and as soon as I spoke, his mind opened. Then I told him to go back north and teach to others. one version of the story right here is that that monk Chen, who's this rough character, shows up and tries to take it from him, and Huineng says, "If you can pick up this bowl and robe, then you can have it." And this monk tries to pick it up, and he can't lift it, and then he falls to his knees in awe and bows to Huineng and asks to be his student. So anyway, that's another version of the story, but that's not the version that happens in this version of the Platform Sutra. So that's the end of the part that I'm going to read today. So that's just in the Platform Sutra starts out with this section of Huineng's life and him sort of autobiographically telling his life. And the rest of the Platform Sutra, in part one, Master Huineng goes on to discuss Buddha nature, the mind of no thought, sudden enlightenment versus gradual enlightenment, and many other key topics common in the realm of Zen Buddhist philosophy. Underlying all of his teachings, at least from my perspective, is this one idea: that to truly understand the teachings of Zen, one must experience sudden enlightenment and see one's own true nature. Until that experience has happened, one is living in delusion. So coming back to the story of Huineng, I would like to point out a few aspects. So though Huineng is often called a barbarian or a jungle rat, he was clearly intelligent, and his karma seems to me to have been quite ripe, like an apple that's just ready to fall from the tree, so that when he walks by and hears the Diamond Sutra being recited, his mind is just ready to pop at that moment, and the self is ready to drop away. So it's not like he's some kind of just average person, doing his job, here's the Diamond Sutra and like, whoa. I doubt that's the case. Let's see. A few other points about the story is, so Huineng's father died when he was young. So if you're familiar with the other, ancestors of Zen Buddhism, and also throughout a lot of different spiritual traditions, there is this pattern of many masters losing a parent when they were young. So the Buddha's mother died soon after he was born. Dogen Zenji's mother died, I think, when Dogen was around 10 years old. Master Hakuin lost a parent. Then we have the sixth ancestor here losing a father when he was young. And so, of course, well, maybe not of course, but probably of course for most people in that kind of situation, it brings up an existential question for people when they see death, when they experience death in very close proximity, young in their lives. There's this question of, oh, I'm going to die one day. We're all going to die one day. Wait, what? If we're all just going to die one day, what are we doing? And so many people are just kind of like, without conscious attention to it, just sort of going on about their lives without really questioning this fundamental aspect of our existence. And so these questions of why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Who is it that is even asking these questions don't come up for most people, it seems. But for someone who's lost a parent early on, or has had some other kind of brush with death early on, or at some point in their life, these questions become front and center and can really direct the path of one's mental formations and the things that they become interested in. And I'm sure many of you have this experience where I definitely went through a period of time where just hanging out with folks, I had no patience for talking about current events or what football team was doing this or anything like that. The only thing that was important to me was talking about life and death and who am I and why are we here and like, what I consider deep topics at the time. Now I have much more interest and patience and tolerance for talking about whatever. But that was true for me for probably like 20 years, where I just really had no interest in talking about anything else. So this was a karmic component probably for Huineng, setting him up for an experience of sudden enlightenment. We might also say too that he probably didn't spend a whole lot of time intellectualizing. It sounds like he was from maybe a rural area. He was illiterate, so maybe not a lot of reading happening. His parents probably didn't read. And he was, it sounds like early on his father had a sort of middle class job, but then once his father was fired from that job and then his father died, he and his mom lived in poverty. So he probably had some early um, middle social class or upper social class training in how to be a human being, but then lived as a wood gatherer. And so he probably spent a lot of time in nature, alone, quiet, gathering wood and walking long distances, taking this wood to places to deliver. And at the time, Taoism had been around for quite a long time. Taoism started a little bit before Buddhism, so around 2,600 years ago or so, and Confucianism was around. And both of these schools of teaching talked about being present and being mindful of what you're doing. They might have had different language for it, but there was an emphasis on, on concentrating the mind, meditation, connection to nature, these kinds of things, and being a good person. Confucianism was a lot about being a good filial member of the family and society. So a lot of precept training already in Confucianism, a lot of connection to nature and expansive mind and spirit in Taoism, which he probably had access to in that sort of middle class or upper class lifestyle from his parents' teaching early on when his dad had a higher position in the government. Um, I also want to say too that his mother probably had an influence on him. So I like to find the feminine impact on Buddhism, even though we don't have much history of that until recent years. And being a psychotherapist, I know the importance of parenting and how parenting impacts someone's nervous system. It impacts their sense of confidence. It impacts their self-esteem and their sense of connection or disconnection. A parent's ability to regulate their emotions impacts a child's ability to regulate their emotions. So if Huining was this sort of ready to awaken person, my guess is that his mother probably did a pretty darn good job raising him to be a good person, to work hard, to care, to be compassionate, to love, and these things. And so he probably, my guess, is that he wasn't carrying around a whole lot of um, challenging karma or emotional baggage, if that makes sense. Because from my experience, it can be a lot of emotional trauma that can keep us from being able to focus on the Dharma and from being open. It seems the more trauma we have, the more tight our systems, I'll say unprocessed trauma, the more tight our systems can become, the more defended we are, the more protected we are. Let's see, just a few more thoughts here. Another important aspect that I want to bring up about this same scenario where he hears the Diamond Sutra is that sudden awakening is unpredictable. It's unpredictable. And so, in all the koans, and so many of the koans that we study, there's all these stories about some monk or, two teachers kind of having a Dharma combat and one of them coming to an awakening experience. But those awakening experiences in those koans could be 30 years down the line after that person has done lots of koan training or has lived in 5 different monasteries and studied with so many different teachers, and they started with this form of Buddhism and then they came over to this kind of Buddhism and then they went over to this monastery, and they're traveling around doing a lot of practice, and eventually some moment happens with the right person at the right time and they wake up. And sometimes it's someone has practiced with a teacher for 20 years and the teacher says, okay, this student needs something. They need to be shocked and have a different experience. So they send them to a teacher. I want you to go talk to so and so. And they go talk to a teacher at a different monastery, and boom, they have an awakening. And it's not that that teacher was any better than this teacher. It's just that it was the situation that the person was out of their context. There was a different style that that teacher was bringing to them that was less known and comfortable, and it shocked them into um, a bigger mind, a bigger mind out of the patterned style of perceiving. So, the best, what, so Huining had all these situations that maybe set him up for that awakening experience. But the best we can do is find a good teacher, which Huining talks about in the Platform Sutra many times. He calls them friend. Find a good friend who already knows, what Buddha nature is, and they've experienced their own true nature. Um, yeah, so we find a realized teacher and cultivate the conditions for us to be ready for that moment, if or when it happens, when or if it happens, which is lots of meditation, simplifying our lives, uh, not just following the precepts, but really exploring the precepts and using the precepts as koans to dissolve our karma and to see where we are stuck and see what we're holding on to and see what we're not letting go of. And the precepts help us see where our twisted karma is, and these things that are getting in the way of us being more open and relaxed in our nervous systems, in our psychological states. Because when we dissolve karma, which is emotional baggage, then our systems relax more and more and more. And it's that emotional baggage, it's that unprocessed, unattended to emotional baggage that makes us behave in the world in certain ways that are harmful to us and to others, and that create more karma for us. And we have to be more defended and more protected. This koan study, reducing our stress in our lives. Stress is also something that can keep us from being relaxed enough for the mind to open. Yeah, so those are things that we can do. And actually, I would say also following our heart. Our heart tells us when it's time to do something, and our heart, our intuition, whatever you want to call it. And really knowing the difference between that and this other part of us that seeks comfort and safety. Because our heart typically is trying to take us out of comfort and safety at times, because that's where we need to learn something and see something new. So I'd like to just finish with one final quote from Huineng from the Platform Sutra. Our nature is pure like the clear sky above, and our wisdom is like the sun and the moon. Our wisdom is always shining. But if externally we become attached to objects, the clouds of delusion cover up our nature and we can't see it. Then, because we meet a good friend who explains the true teaching, our delusions are blown away and everything inside and outside becomes perfectly clear. And the 10,000 dharmas in this nature of ours all appear. This nature of ours, in which the 10,000 dharmas are present, is what we mean by the pure dharma body. Those of you who take refuge in yourselves, if you get rid of bad thoughts and bad practices, this is called taking refuge. So, thank you all.